We got to run on.
The EscapeGoat podcast. A podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Hello and welcome to the EscapeGoat podcast, episode 23. And this qualifies as the sort of second part of an episode that we did back in the tail end of October, early November. And I'd like to welcome back, I've got three guests with me today, but I'm initially going to welcome back Tierney, who was on that episode, which we recorded just before the US presidential election. How are you doing, Tierney?
It's been a week. It was an interesting week to leave Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Tierney picked this. Yeah, we as we mentioned before in the previous episode, me and Tierney are part of a political discussion group on Facebook, and I think was it actually when it was. We'll get into this obviously, but it was actually Tuesday, Wednesday when I just got a message from you like, yeah, I'm off, bye, and I was like, great. I'll just hold the fort. Nothing going on.
No, just yeah. I mean, it's really kind of a blight, but for me personally, I just found that in the midst of isolation because of COVID and then also just being separated from friends and family, it was not helping with the loneliness at all. It was exacerbating it, and I was like, okay, I gotta go. This is 2021. There's so many other ways to talk to people.
I think people would be fairly sympathetic to that approach.
No regrets, except that I do miss Game of Seats. I don't know how I'm going to keep up on British politics now.
Yeah, how are you gonna follow the fortunes of the Cornish nationalists? It's beyond me. I'll just email you occasionally.
Oh no, look, I stand Nicola Sturgeon. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there's plenty of things about UK politics to enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's also quite a common point of view. We might get onto that as well. I mean, we'll introduce our other two guests in a second, but I did want to look back briefly on our first episode, which I'll put that in the show notes so people can listen to it. Although it's obviously a historical curio now, because we were talking before the election. I mean, we made a few predictions there. We weren't that bold, but we neither of us thought Texas would go blue this round, and it didn't.
Yeah.
I think we had mixed feelings about Florida. Cautiously optimistic, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
I think you said something like, if the votes are counted proper, Pennsylvania will go blue. I think you said something like that, and
yep.
I guess that's the situation we ended up with.
Arizona was a bit of a surprise to me, having been to Arizona.
So. Sure, right, yeah. Well, I don't think we even talked about Georgia. I mean, that's obviously been such a huge part of the puzzle since then, hasn't it?
No, and I'm really impressed, and I think that so much credit has very rightly gone to Stacey Abrams for the incredible work she did down there, for very grassroots get out the vote campaign, and it just goes to show you that it worked in spite of the fact that the Secretary of State there is absolutely not afraid of the Democratic Party or voting access.
Yeah, well, we might talk a little bit about how Friends of the Democratic Party has been a category that's somewhat broadened in the last week due to the crazy nature of events that we've been dealing with. But before we get into that, I'll just introduce our two additional guests this week. So I'd like to welcome my friend Megan to the podcast. Hey, Megan. Hello. And my friend Sophie. How are you, Sophie?
Hey, I'm good.
Good, fantastic. People know a little bit about, probably know a little bit about me now, but also I'm speaking to you from London in the UK today. Tierney has been on the podcast before. And where are you speaking from, Tierney?
I'm in Rochester, New York.
Lovely
Still.
Stuff. yeah, still. We're all still where we were.
Yep.
Megan, would you like to talk for a minute or so about where you're from, where you are at now?
Yeah, no problem. I am currently in the Republic of Ireland, in County Cork. I've been here with minus our brief stint in Canada. I've been here since 2008. Originally from Indiana, from a small town about half an hour north of Indianapolis, and then went to the UK for 5 years, and then I've been in Ireland ever since. So been nearly, I think in 2 years, I'll have lived more of my life outside of America than inside it, which was a bit of a which was a weird kind of statistic when I worked it out the other day. It doesn't feel like, you know, I'm old enough to have half my life in one country and half my life in another country.
I know the feeling. And how would you, I mean, we'll obviously get into more, this would be more apparent, but how would you describe your kind of, political orientation very briefly?
Now, compared to, I suppose in general, I would definitely be, I suppose, more of a social democrat. It's kind of the shortest way to describe it, I suppose, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Of course, it's I mean, we'll be noting this along the way, isn't it? But some of these terms tend to mean different things in Europe than they do in America.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Sophie, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am in Omaha. I've been here for 7 years almost. But I was born and grew up in Manchester, so lived in Manchester till I went to university in Scotland.
Manchester, UK, I should say.
Oh, yeah. Yep, the UK. And then, lived in Scotland for 3 years, lived in Australia for a year, and then moved to here in Nebraska in 2014. So here I am.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say you kind of fell on the political scale?
Pretty solidly socialist. I feel like as I get older, I just move more and more to the left. So.
All right, you're a sort of Tony Benn type.
I'm just slide in, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when you get people to self-define these things, isn't it? You know, because people sometimes give you answers that surprise you, you know, in terms of where they see themselves as to where you might see them or categorise them. But I mean, I deliberately wanted to get you guys together for this chat just because I think we're all what you might call like flavours of left. You know, but we've obviously all had, you know, different backgrounds with it and different links to America. Obviously, with much more so with you three than with me. But it's kind of, I wanted to get sympathetic perspectives, but ones that are interestingly varying as well. You know, because it's not. I don't think it's just an echo chamber here. You know.
I thought you brought me back on to hold me accountable for the things I've said about Indiana and Nebraska.
That's true. Yeah.
Like specifically the last podcast, I was like, they're 2 states. They can just fuck right off. And those were the 2.
Yeah, so I brought you before a jury of your peers in order to administer some justice for those unconscionable statements.
Like, in my defense, I only drove through them, but yeah, for me, my experience in Indiana was cops, swamp, and toll roads. So
not entirely inaccurate.
Yeah, well, it's Mike Pence's state. You know, it's obviously a thing of beauty. You know, it's produced him.
But we've also produced Pete. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say we are a nuanced state, David.
That's true. There's a lot going on.
Yes.
I just wanted to, because me and Tierney, you know, obviously we talked before the election a bit about this and everything, but I just wanted to, before we move on to more recent, because obviously a hell of a lot's happened, so we've got a lot to whiz through, but I just wanted to ask Megan and Sophie about how election night itself and kind of the aftermath of that had gone for you. Megan first, like, did you watch much of that? Did you...
Well, I will freely admit that I slept. I went to bed. I was pregnant. I was still pregnant, but I went to bed at like 11 o'clock because realistically with the time zones, it was going to be like 2 o'clock in the morning over here before anything fairly interesting happened. So yeah, I slept through the end of the day, I suppose, in America. But definitely, you know, when I woke up the next morning, the first thing, you know, that I looked at was how things were going. And it wasn't like, I mean, I remember 4 years ago, I was also pregnant. It was actually my due date on the election day. And I remember waking up and, you know, Trump was clearly winning. Everything, like the Republicans just took everything. And I was downstairs sobbing. And Niall thought that I was in labor. And he came down and he was like, is it time? And I just was like, they have everything. They took everything. This wasn't quite as traumatic of a scenario to wake up to. It was still you know, my initial thought was, oh crap, we're going to have another 4 years. But it didn't look as dire as it did in 2016. So that was kind of my initial feelings.
Someone described it to me as like a 2008 result or something approaching that, but with all the tension and pacing of 2000, you know, which I thought was kind of covered it. You know, it was kind of you know, if you're of a left inclination, it was a happy outcome eventually.
It did, but you know what? It actually didn't.
It
I felt like it started to turn around faster than I anticipated. Like, I thought we were going to be weeks of uncertainty, and it was only days, which, you know, I kind of feel like it went faster than the decision was made. I felt a bit faster than I anticipated.
And Sophie, how did that go for you? Obviously, unlike Megan, you're actually based in the States at the moment, so it wasn't quite as late a night, I guess. But how did that unfold for you?
Yeah, I was watching it. I mean, it started well, and then it looked bad, and then it looked really bad, and then I was convinced that we'd have 4 more years of Trump. And then I think the turnaround was when they called Arizona really weirdly early. And once they called that, it was like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Maybe not. And from then on, it seemed it just looked better. And so from then on, I just felt a bit more relieved, like, you know, okay, this is going to be okay.
I was going to say that Nebraska's not like, you know, not what you call a left-leaning state, is it? But is it Nebraska?
Hey, we have 1 blue vote.
Yeah, that's why they did the split thing there, don't they?
5. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Nebraska District 2 went blue for the first time since 2008.
That's right. Yeah, that's the bit that always makes the map look really confusing. Is the Nebraska
just a little
bit.
dot. Boop. Yeah.
Yeah. That's it.
I think Maine does something similar, where I think Maine has 2 districts and they split their electoral votes.
And I think there was one state. Oh, was it Maine actually? That this year had reformed to like do a ranked choice thing for presidential candidates. It's kind of a thing they're experimenting with.
I thought that was Vermont.
I was going to say New Hampshire.
You know what?
What are the
Can we just recite the 50 states, and through the magic of editing, I'll make it look as though we knew what we were talking about. So, you know, Alaska.
I still know all the capitals. I still know all of them.
Is that from the Animaniacs song?
No, it's from a driving game that we played as kids. So whenever we'd see a license plate from out of state, if we called it first, we get to hit whoever's closest. Typically, it was my sister. And but you got a second one if you got the capital. So there was some real incentive there, and I still know all of them.
I like that, you know, these Hamilton games always involve violence as a sort of component part of them. This is very healthy, I think, you know, therapeutically.
Well, you know, it's card games. It's what you do.
It is, yeah. I mean, I wanted to. It's a sort of hopelessly huge question, really, but we will nail down some of the specifics of it. But I wanted to kind of ask you guys in turn, like, how you think it's been going since then, and what we'll do is we won't get into the events of this week specifically yet, because I think they obviously require their own discussion. But in terms of everything that's happened since Election Day, the sort of general mood of, I guess, of the states in general, and obviously the big political actors here, you know, like what Biden's done, what Trump's done. I mean, Tierney first. I mean, as given the result we got in the days in November, like, I mean, has this played out, you know, roughly as you thought it would? Has Trump's actions surprised you? Has any of it surprised you?
It's been a pretty quiet couple months. You know, seems smooth transition. Nothing really to speak of. I'm not even sure why I'm here.
Yeah, I know, it's just a footnote in history, you know.
Well, I think we talked about this, and everybody sort of knew that it would be pretty rough and pretty brutal. I don't necessarily think that people thought it would go the direction it did. I mean, I'm trying to remember even when Four Seasons Landscaping happened, because I was just like, when even was that? But you know, it's hard for me to gauge mood exactly, because I haven't left my home since before Thanksgiving. So I mean, I don't even go to the grocery store anymore. So aside from sort of sitting in Zoom school and talking about that a little bit, and then hearing my partner be very frustrated in a way that I haven't been, because I consider myself a pacifist. You know, it's and mood with my friends. I'm really blathering on here because it's hard to describe. You can't really put words to how weird everything has been. Just just strange. But I will say that we went for a motorcycle ride within a couple days of the election, and at first it seemed like we were seeing a lot of Trump and MAGA flags around us because Rochester is sort of this like blue dot, and I mean, like upstate New York, you will see Confederate flags here, a state that was in the Union.
Yeah, I find that so bizarre. You told me about that on the last podcast. That's still so. The idea of Northern Confederate flags is so strange, but
it's it's about heritage, right? So, and then we got a little bit further down toward an area called the Finger Lakes, and then we started to see a lot more of it. So you can see that there really are people out there who genuinely believe and are diehard supporters of this guy. But what struck me is that I've seen a much more pronounced sort of co-opting of phrases so they don't mean anything anymore. People talk about the Constitution, and I think even Marsha Blackburn or somebody was basically said, like, we're never going to change it. That was just like, it's a built-in function. Like, we have amendments. But this whole idea that, like, things are communist when they're clearly just functions of a capitalist system. For example, people bitching about Trump getting removed from Twitter, saying that it was stifling free speech, and I was just like, they're a private company. These are the people you stand up for when they want to drill in Alaska.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are issues where you can look at it either way, right? You can look at it as the exercise of corporate free speech, or control of such, or you can look at it as, because I've seen a lot of people going on in the last few days. I said we wouldn't get into this yet, but we won't in detail. But you can look at it accurately as well as companies having this massive sway over political events and over, I have some sympathy, not with most of the people expressing that view, but with the view itself.
Yeah, I'd say that it's mostly what's been surprising to me is, like I said, it's like people talk about freedom, people talk about liberty, they talk about all of these sort of American buzzwords, and they've just stopped meaning anything, because what people seem to be, or I'd say what people support that actually seem to be attracted to is autocracy and fascism. And that's what's been weird, is just to watch language that means something be co-opted to mean the exact opposite.
That's what politics is all about,
I guess.
Megan, how's it been for you? Because obviously, as well as your own reaction, I guess you've been hearing a fair bit from your family and friends in the States. How's it seemed?
Well, I suppose on the one hand, kind of like Tierney was saying, nobody's been particularly surprised by the tantrums and things, like, I think we all were kind of expecting that he wasn't going to go quietly into the night, but I don't know, I think it's been, to a certain extent, it's been quite hard, I think, for certain, like, the transition hasn't really been very high on the priority list and the conversation list for a lot of my family back home, because I mean, COVID has just deteriorated so quickly in Indiana that very much, I think a lot of people are just, that's really their kind of their main priority. And the last thing you want to spend your time doing is listening to them even more negativity with the way that he's been kind of behaving.
When you're getting what is it, like over 4,000 deaths a day across the states at the moment.
Oh, it's crazy. The one thing I will say though that I have been kind of focusing on, I suppose, with the transition is I have enjoyed watching the announcements from Biden and Harris of the new position, the new secretaries of the various positions, and the team that they're building. It's been even though I might not necessarily know a lot of them, it's been nice to see that people who are competent and deserving of positions are actually kind of going to be moving into them. There's been a nice whether or not you consider it lip service, the majority of the people they're electing are women. There's a good variety of people of color. There's young people as well as experienced people. And it's been nice to see that, you know, they're basically saying, like, we still have a job to do and we're going to keep getting ready for it. And I'm quite hopeful for the people that are going to be in place in a month's time.
Yeah, well, they've been making a real thing of setting out the stall in that respect, haven't they? I think they always have a bit of that with incoming administrations, but I think the Biden-Harris team have probably rightly sensed that people need a bit of that. You know, they need a bit of kind of reassurance almost.
Absolutely, and I personally have found that quite reassuring. It's been nice to kind of watch their announcements and I suppose to a certain extent, because I don't necessarily recognize a lot of the advisors and stuff. It's been interesting to kind of read up on them, and you know, as someone living outside of America, it's nice to be reminded that you know, there are still competent politicians and political people in America that you know, they do still exist, and it's nice that, you know, at least for 4 years we're going to have a relatively competent administration, hopefully.
Yeah, people have been jousting the same joke a few places where people are like, you know, that you just want a president that you can forget about for a few days, you know, like kind of like most people normally ignore politics, you know, and that's maybe healthy. Yeah,
and I kind of, but I really feel like that's something that I think is not a bad thing, you know, and that's one thing I've noticed over here in Ireland. Politicians are a lot more, they're not really, like, the personalities aren't as big, and you know, it will be nice to have not as big of a personality in the White House. Someone who's just a bit more relaxed, I think, will be good.
We're going to have half an hour at the end of this podcast where Megan explains the difference between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil on a policy by policy basis. So that's going to be fun. That's a little extra for the Patreon. So look forward to that. Sophie, I wanted, you know, I was going to get in with Megan was talking about cabinet appointments there. I mean, obviously the nature of some of Biden's cabinet appointments might be something you'll have some thoughts on. But just before that, what's the mood been like amongst you and your friendship group? You know, sort of since the election. I mean, how's the anxiety treating you in general? You know?
You know, it's just a lot. It's a lot to keep track of every day, and it's kind of exhausting. So, like we were talking about earlier before we started recording, I kind of drift in and out. I'll pay attention for a while, and I'll just be like, I can't anymore with this. But I'm also not. I'm not a fan of Biden. I'm not excited about Biden, so I don't feel that joy. I feel relieved. I'm happy that Trump is gone. I'm relieved that that's over, but I'm not excited for the future either, and I'm not excited about his cabinet picks either. So I don't feel this sense of I don't feel super hopeful right now either. So it's been like a twofold thing to keep on top of and keep track of and worry about for me.
And in terms of Trump's behaviour, I mean, is that kind of, has he outplayed your expectations, or, you know? What?
Not really. I mean, I feel like he's just stayed true to form, and he hasn't done really, to be honest, he hasn't really done anything that surprised me. In the beginning, I was actually pleasantly surprised at how few of the other Republican congressmen were kind of jumping on board. They were kind of like, no, we're not gonna get on board this crazy train. But then recently, that's, you know, they all have been. So
yeah,
I don't know. I'm not surprised. I'm just kind of like, okay, what's next? Let's do something about it at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more about the sort of likely shape of the Democrats, which obviously has changed a fair bit in ways that we can't quite ascertain yet because of Georgia. And by that I mean the Georgia Senate elections that came in this week as well. Quite a lot's happened this week, hasn't it? I've noticed. But before that, we should probably respond to the you know, because this episode is being recorded, I should say, on Saturday the 9th of January 2021, and obviously we're all reeling a bit from a week where it was a Wednesday, wasn't it? On Wednesday the 6th, when the US Congress was attempting to certify the election results. By what I'm sort of pithily calling the Battle of Capitol Hill, because there doesn't really seem to have been a way to describe it that's coming there. From what I can tell on Twitter, there isn't really a parlance for it yet. I think the Wikipedia entry just says something like the storming of the US Capitol in January 2021, you know, which is not that catchy. So here's me trying to do the first draft of history. No, but I mean, you know, we're just a few days off the Capitol building being stormed by a mob of largely Trump supporters, it seems. I mean, how I mean, I was watching it on TV. I was watching the speeches. I was watching Mitch McConnell's speech and then Schumer's speech, and then I think I had to go on a Zoom call for something, and Cruz was speaking. And that was the last thing. That I stopped paying attention. And it's like one of those ridiculous sitcom situations where like, how much could realistically happen when you're on a Zoom call? And then I switched CNN back on. I was like, Tierney, how were you? Were you at leisure to keep track of that on Wednesday, or how did that play out for you?
I spent most of Wednesday laughing hysterically. I couldn't. It's just too much, and it's so many friends were like, I'm so terrified, I'm so freaked out. And I was literally just like cracking beers, like, oh my god, what the fuck is happening? This is insane. Like, that was basically my Wednesday. And yeah, there was a certain point at which I was just like, I don't think they actually certified anything until it was like 3-something on Thursday morning. So there was a point at which it just got to be so late. I was more just sort of baffled at Al Qaeda, just mostly just looking at the photos of them, just going like, oh my god, like, this is your master race? Are you kidding me? But yeah, I think you just sort of get to a point, and I was talking to another one of my friends who was like exactly the same. She's like, my mom's so mad at me because she was so afraid, and I just can't stop laughing. And yeah, it is just because you sort of get punch drunk, where there's just so much insanity happening, and it gets so ridiculous. I mean, I talked about Four Seasons landscaping earlier, and then there was the whole thing where like Rudy Giuliani's like hair dye was dripping. And then there was that I think it was at Michigan, there was a testimony or a hearing where this woman who's coming up and spouting these conspiracy theories was clearly like absolutely shit-faced.
She was amazing.
she was something. So yeah, there's and you just see the number of Republicans who would either turn a blind eye or
you do end up with certain fatigue at ridiculousness as well, don't you? Which means that like you talk about Rudy Giuliani alone. I've become kind of mildly fascinated with Rudy Giuliani, as probably a lot of people have. Has anyone listened to his podcast?
Oh God, no.
God, I didn't know he had a podcast.
Yeah, I edit it, for him. It's no big deal. No, it's basically it's him monologuing basically, and he's been doing it since about March last year, and it's all about it's all about his role as Trump's advisor and obviously more recently about Democrat fraud as he sees it, and it's for the fascinating that it's kind of like proper car crash listening for me. I listened to one of them earlier today. This is his one that he's released since the Capitol Hill incident, and it's all full of self-justification and justification for the Trump regime, and it's all kind of it's proper fascinating stuff, because he is such a ridiculous man, obviously, and has been for quite a long time. Like, he's like, one thing I realised that like a lot of this, I mean, Trump gets his poison from various sources, obviously everyone goes on about Fox News and stuff, but one thing I've realised is that Giuliani's probably been whispering in his ear for several years now, or maybe decades actually, because I guess they knew each other back when he was mayor and stuff, but at least a little bit. But Giuliani is like obsessed with democratic corruption from his days in New York. Like he is of the opinion that New York is a crooked Democrat city, and the fact that he became mayor, he seems to overlook that as a counter argument to that. But he thinks votes are rigged. He genuinely in some ways he's full of shit, but in other ways I think he genuinely believes that crooked Democrat cities are widespread across America, and that things like that.
Yeah, I think he's sort of an example of somebody who sort of grifted his way to the top. The more I learned sort of a bit more about his biography, I feel like 9/11 maybe gave him some kind of gravitas and stature that he never really earned. Mm-hmm. Especially as somebody who so heavily overused stop and frisk in New York City, and people really like to look at it and be like, well, he really cleaned it up. Times Square was just nothing but like strip clubs and blah blah blah. Which first, like, I don't see how that's a problem. Second, just the more I learned about it, the more I'm like, oh no, he's always been a piece of shit. He just got lucky.
Well, he's part of that. He's part of that same strata of very conservative and arguably racist Republicans that that comprise the party in that part of the country, isn't he? You know,
I don't feel like that's arguable. I think provably is probably empirically.
Yeah. My job on this podcast, unfortunately, is the guy who has to give Rudy Giuliani the benefit of the doubt. Imagine that as a
Why?
Imagine that as a role. I don't know.
He hasn't earned it.
I'm British, you know. This is how we do things. No, he's odious, obviously, but he's also ridiculous. And you know, this is how we got into this. You know, talking about the Capitol Hill incident. You know, a lot of that was, you know, because people were sharing memes and images of some of the protesters, you know, like posing inside the Capitol Hill buildings with various props and you know, governmental property and everything like that. And people were laughing at it, you know, because it was one of those historical events that was both terrifying, unpredictable, and ridiculous as well, wasn't it? You know, it was all of those things at once.
I have an ex-boyfriend who looks like the QAnon shaman, and I think that may have been one of the things that just made me like, what even is this?
Yeah, he looks a bit like a Mighty Boosh character or something as well, doesn't he? You know, it's kind of it's even harder to take him seriously. I mean, Meg, I don't know how you were reacting to all of that when were you getting to watch any of that unfold?
Well, weirdly, I was actually video chatting my mom when it all kind of kicked off, and so I was chatting to her for just under 2 hours. So she and I were blissfully unaware of what was happening, and then like 10-20 minutes after I got off the phone with her, she sent me a message and she was like, never in my life have I seen anything like this. And she was like, I literally don't know what to say. And you know what, she was born in 1950, so you know, she's arguably seen you know, the 60s and the 70s where there was an awful lot of crazy going on. So, and then I think actually, David, when you sent me a message about, you know, how we're not going to have anything to talk about on Saturday, I still hadn't properly realized what was happening, because when I got off the phone with my mum, I went for a walk, and then once I actually looked at the news and everything started to sink in, it was definitely the initial reaction was holy shit, but then kind of like Tierney was saying, like, it's just, you kind of had to laugh or you were just going to cry, do you know? I did also laugh out loud when I saw the picture of the guy sitting in Nancy Pelosi's desk with his foot up.
That was an innately funny photo. I mean,
it kind of was, and then it was kind of one of those, if you don't think about it too much, it's funny. And then, but that kind of was my whole take on the whole day was, you know, if you think about it too hard, you realize just how so many levels it was just, you know, a slap in the face.
That gentleman has now been arrested, I noticed. That was announced today.
Good.
Good. I think it was kind of, we can talk a bit about Trump's, you know, culpability in this and everything, but I was just thinking, I think when the crowds had been dispersed, you know, and the curfew had been successfully declared, and you know, the building had been cleared again for the ratification process to continue and complete. It was only then when I realised, like, all the ways in which that could have gone bad and worse, because I was thinking, one of them that I wasn't thinking about in the moment was, like, if they'd, you know, if a faction of the rioters had taken any hostages, you know, like literally anything from Mike Pence on down, you know, or like, you know, any Congress people or senators, that could have got really ugly, couldn't? Because even if they were just doing it, not as a joke, obviously, but, you know, like as a spur of the moment thing, that would have then become a bed-in situation, and that would have become a hostage situation, and it would have become a sort of SWAT team thing, or like, you know, like FBI SWAT team. God knows what level that stuff operates at. And you know, if they'd actually taken the vice president hostage, you know, whatever you think of Mike Pence, that would have been not a walk-backable situation, would it? You know, and obviously you could have had anything from dozens to hundreds of people injured and killed. You know, I think at the moment the death toll is 5 people. I think.
Yeah. But that was one of the things that kind of surprised me the most in the kind of initial period of watching it happen was just how, whether deliberately, intentionally or not, just how underprepared the security people in the Capitol were. Like, I know that the Sergeant of Arms has resigned, and I think, you know, most of the people in charge of security have resigned since that. But like, I mean, as you say, it could have gotten really bad really fast, and you're kind of there going, that's not supposed to happen. You know, these people shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that easy to get in and get that close to the the seat of power, so to speak.
Yeah, well, because we're doing such a first draft of history kind of reaction here. I mean, some of the facts. I sound like Rudy Giuliani here, but some of the facts just aren't known yet. You know, in the sense that we're not really sure at this historical juncture what was done in the White House for those hours, what Trump's actions were. There's rumours about what Mike Pence's actions may have been when he kind of, we think, wrestled control of the situation in the sense of calling in the National Guard or encouraging that. That may have been done more at the sort of mayoral level at Washington. I believe, like we know, several governors of neighbouring states got involved in. Like Virginia sent in like the National Guard in Maryland as well. I think it's a bit murky at the moment, you know. And Trump's actions have been rumoured to be anything from complete indifference to just kind of essentially munching popcorn whilst watching the news to actually actively. I read today, like actively calling senators whilst the building was being occupied to further twist their arms and stuff like that. I don't know why they were taking these calls.
There
are
recordings
stage.
Of that. There's a recording.
Oh, has that emerged already? Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that 100% happened.
Can we just? I'm going to get Sophie's thoughts on this in a sec, but can we just agree that this has not been a good week for Ted Cruz?
It hasn't been a good 4 years for Ted Cruz, really, has it?
Fuck Ted Cruz. I don't care if he has like the worst day of his life tomorrow.
Well, he is the Zodiac killer, so you know.
There are certain people in the GOP who it just makes me happy when they're sad. Like I don't care about these people, but I get pleasure when I see that they're upset, or you know. And Ted Cruz is one of them.
Well,
so.
that was if you cast your mind back to the happy days of 2016, that was one of the few pleasures of Trump's primary run, wasn't it? Was just watching him successfully, let's face it, humiliate several people like Marco Rubio, and you know, all that. I mean, he arguably hasn't recovered in reputation since then, really, has he? You know,
it's just beautiful to see these people. They've given everything to like latch on to Trump and please Trump and do whatever Trump wants, and he just continues to like insult their wives and insult them and call them names and just ruin their lives, and it's just beautiful. I love it.
Well, obviously we've seen a bit of a I don't know, because I was before the Capitol Hill thing even happened, so I was watching Mitch McConnell's speech and I was getting really annoyed. I was like going on to my flatmate here about, you know, like why. You know, they were like, oh, he sounds pretty reasonable. I was like, he's not reasonable. He's what he is doing is he is using his parachute at exactly the moment he was always going to use it. And this is disgusting hypocrisy. And I was getting a bit, I don't tend to get like that about politics, but I was getting a bit annoyed. Not annoyed, but just like how you can just tell how successfully his reputation will recover and be varnished by, you know, centre-right historians, can't you, basically? And it just, he will be seen as the man who kept the show on the road through the Trump era and basically repudiated him when it was most important to, and didn't go down the disrupting the ratification route and everything like that. And Mitch McConnell will be seen as, I think, I might be wrong, but he might be seen as this kind of, you know, respectable giant of the party, you know, for decades to come. And I just can't stand it. I can't. It's so upsetting because people like, you know, not to be conspiracy minded about it, because it's just forces of history and power, you know, but like those sort of people always get away with it. You know, the guys who can wear it well, the guys who can brush it off the shoulder, you know, it's annoying. But yeah, I mean, in terms of Trump's culpability, because obviously I think events are moving quite fast at the moment. I'm going to try my best to get this episode out tomorrow, so it could all change. But it looks as though Democrats in the House are moving for a second impeachment. I can't even believe I'm saying some of this stuff. For a second impeachment before the end of his term, which could go to a vote next week. Do you guys think? You know, do you think that's a good idea, Sophie? I'll start with Sophie.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think a lot of people think, well, what's the point? But anything that prevents him... I mean, just because he's impeached doesn't mean he's going to be removed. But if he is, then he can't run in 2024. And he loses his pension or something like that too, so...
I think he's probably got more financial worries than that coming at him when he leaves the presidency, but
yeah,
who knows?
Throw it all at him, make him stressed, make him unhappy, set a precedent, I guess, you know.
Megan, do you think if that does happen and Trump is barred from running in 2024, do you think that's good in the sense that, I mean, not as in do you want him as president again, but do you think that's the best way to deal with it, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't really know what the best way to deal with it would be. It would be, you know, if we could prevent him from running again definitively, that would be great. I personally don't think we have to worry about it. I honestly don't think he's going to run again. I think by then he will have his own TV channel, and I think his attention will have moved elsewhere. Personally, I kind of wish that they had been successful the first time round, and then we wouldn't have to spend the last 11 days of his presidency trying to push an impeachment through that. We shouldn't be sitting here the last 2 weeks of a president's time trying to make sure that they can never come back. It's definitely not a situation that we should have even been in the first place. But I personally don't think he's going to come back anyway.
Yeah, the fact that you're basically having to cast something like an occult banishing spell on your own president is not an ideal circumstance, is it?
It is not.
I mean, Tierney, do you think? It looks like it's going to happen, or at least it's the House is going to pass it. Obviously, eyes will be on the senators, and maybe particularly on the Republican senators to see what they do, because they're all going to have to make a decision. How do you think that's going to play out?
Sure. Well, I agree with Sophie 100% on this, which is that he should be impeached, even if it is right at the end of his term. I think that it's important. This is so not my style to say this, but I think it's important that there be consequences for actions, and to at least sort of demonstrate that it does mean something, that it's not just he's got senioritis, so we're just gonna let this slide. Of course, this is the part where I said I was going to sound both intelligent and opinionated because I did my homework. So the problem though with impeachment is that the Senate is not actually back in session until January 19th.
Exactly.
And more homework I did. After having left office, you can still be impeached. It was done with Ulysses S. Grant, Secretary of War. Fun fact. So he was still punished after the fact. Basically, what the Senate would have to do in order to come back beforehand is you would need all 100 senators to agree to do it, to take up the articles of impeachment. So, sort of best case scenario, what I'm hoping for is that the House does impeach him. The articles of impeachment do go to the Senate, and my understanding is that he can't, even if he's convicted, you can't remove him from office, but you only need a simple majority, I believe, to bar him from ever running for public office again.
That's my understanding of it, yeah.
And that, I think, is not an impossible hurdle to overcome, especially given, let's say you lose someone like Joe Manchin. Lisa Murkowski and Mitt Romney have been extremely vocal about their feelings. So that's, I think that, even if he doesn't necessarily end up in a situation where he would run for public office again, I do think that just sort of having if you incite a riot against the Capitol, if you try to gin up your supporters to take out a branch of government, you are going to be slapped on the wrist for it.
I was wondering, because famously Nixon wasn't fully impeached. He resigned when he saw the writing on the wall, essentially. Jumped before he was pushed. Do you think? I was thinking about this actually because I was thinking, well, if Trump saw the same thing coming down, barreling down the halls of power, and basically he would do the same. He probably, because he wouldn't want to be the only president impeached. He wouldn't want to have that marker in history. But then I was thinking, well, with him being the man he is, maybe he would at this stage. Maybe he. Yeah. I mean, because there's kind of the impeached man. That's kind of, he could spin that, couldn't he? Or at least people around him could spin that.
I was just gonna say that.
There you go. So I mean, that seems like the sort of thing he could use, doesn't it? Or
then he'd be the only president who's been impeached.
He'll call himself a martyr, and add it to his.
The man who was so dangerous, they had to, they had to get rid of him because he was too on your side, that kind of thing. I mean, that's how he's going to spin it anyway, isn't it? But that could be an extra badge of honour. The establishment, the swamp impeached him. Because of course they would. It's going to be quite. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about after the break, which we're about to take. We'll talk a little bit more about the sort of like where the hell the Republican Party goes from this, as well as the future angles for the Democrats. But I think you guys are right in pointing out that it's far from certain that Trump would run for president again anyway, even if he could. There's a whole bunch of kind of acolytes and family members who could take up that role of evolving and developing Trumpism. I think it's looking less likely that will be Ted Cruz now, which is at least amusing. But I noticed that Ted Cruz's Senate seat runs out in 2024, doesn't it? That's his current term in Texas ends then. So presumably that's why he might have a bit of an eye on that. Be interesting to see if they can take him out next time there if he does run again. But yeah, before we leave this half, really, because we'll come back after the break and talk more about some of that stuff. I just wanted to. I basically want to know if you guys think. What do you think is going to happen in the next few days? Do you think? Are there any sort of like crazy surprises that you're half anticipating? I know that's a bit of a contradiction in terms, but starting with Sophie.
Who knows? I really don't know. I feel like anything could happen.
I mean, people were talking about military options, weren't they? People were talking about things he might do in terms of Iranian policy and things like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really feel like Trump has that much of an interest in foreign policy. I don't think he'll do anything crazy like that. I think he's just going to try and push through probably a bunch of executions, a bunch of pardons.
A self-pardon, perhaps. He was apparently looking into the options of that, consulting his lawyers.
Yeah, but I don't know.
I think if the American establishment, if the administration, I guess, allows him to self-pardon, that will be a new low in American politics. I think that will be. I don't know who can stand in his way. That I guess the Attorney General, one would hope. But
yeah.
What about you, Meg? Are you absolutely clenching the arms of your chair this whole week, or what?
No, not quite that extreme. I kind of agree with Sophie. I don't think he's gonna do. There's not going to be any nuclear buttons pushed or anything. And I'm sure I read something today or yesterday where was it Nancy Pelosi's already been on to the Pentagon. Somebody's been on to the Pentagon just to kind of make sure that there are back channels in place in case he does decide to do anything. But that certainly hasn't. His pattern is not one of having much interest outside of America. So I don't think. But I definitely agree with Sophie. I think we're going to see a lot more executions. I mean, how many has he done since he lost the election? Anyway, the last time I looked, there was 11 federal executions, and I'm sure it's gone up because that was several weeks ago that I looked at that. And I'd say he still has a list of people that friends and family that he wants to pardon. So I think we're going to see. I think that's probably. I agree with Sophie. I'd say that's where he's going to focus his attention. And to be honest, if he can't tweet anymore, he's probably we could potentially just not hear very much from him, to be honest, because his mouthpiece has kind of been taken away.
Maybe he could give a speech or something, using the White House press office. He's not exactly a guy without options, is he? We keep forgetting this. I thought it was really, it's funny you mentioned that, Meg. I thought it was really interesting that Pelosi mentioned that she talked to. I can't remember exactly who it was. It was an official in the White House who deals with that kind of military coordination, I guess. I found it interesting that she was very non-specific about what she'd learned, wasn't she? She was very tactful about I've spoken to them and and I was kind of, isn't it strange that, because America's obviously still really far and away the most powerful country in the world, and including its military arsenal and its nuclear arsenal, and isn't it strange that for the next week and a half, basically your nuclear deterrent is essentially switched off. It's essentially on standby because the guy who with the button can't be trusted.
Yeah.
So that's kind of mental, isn't it? In terms of modern American history, that's the shield is down in a sense. It's kind of because the alternative, putting the shield up, is worse. reassuring thoughts. I mean, Tierney, how are you doing? How are your nerves going to hold up, do you think?
Do you guys remember when, like, I think it was like towards the end of the Obama administration, the news came out that the nuclear codes were literally like 00000? Let's look it up. That was something that came
1, 2,
out.
3.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, it's the password.
You'll know this, Tierney, but what's the Star Trek movie where they're setting the self-destruct sequence on the Enterprise, and it's like isn't Kirk's code something like 00000 destruct?
Oh, what was that? It might have been. Is it the Wrath of Khan? I'm trying to like. They've just gone through so many Enterprises.
I think it's 3. I think it's 3. I'm being a bad Trekkie here. I think it's the Search for Spock, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know.
That always made me laugh as a kid.
Yeah.
I've been mostly thinking about Deep Space Nine lately. Although
that's not to do with fascism, is it, by any chance?
Well, no, like Real Gold Ducat on Twitter was like one of my favorite accounts to follow because it was literally just somebody tweeting like rewording like Trump tweets to sound like Gold Ducat. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the Bajoran workers will know that I won by a lot. I won by a tremendous amount, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I think probably self-pardon is in order. As far as the rest, I mean, like, I don't know. I couldn't honestly say that I think it's going to be quiet, and I couldn't honestly say that things are gonna be as bananas as they were. So
he said he's not going to the inauguration now. He's confirmed that, and I saw Biden was doing a speech, wasn't he, around the same time that was confirmed, and Biden was like, I think that's the only thing me and him agree on, is he shouldn't he shouldn't go. Although apparently Pence is welcome. That's he's made a point.
I saw that he was planning to go to his golf course in St Andrews, and they were like, no.
That was one of the funnier things that happened this week. Nicola Sturgeon politely reminding him that is illegal.
We, as a friend of mine would put it, we have no choice but to stand.
That's not bad.
Well, that's a good note. We'll go to the break now. I'll just play a little clip of something. I don't know what the appropriate thing is to play this week. Just yelling into the void. And then we'll be back and we'll talk about some other elements of this that have come into play in recent weeks. See you shortly.
Superman! Did you hear me? Wait!
We've waited too long as it is.
They couldn't see the beauty. No imagination. They'd rather fight.
Even this wasn't enough for you, was it? You had to have it all. Now we're on the brink of a war that could destroy the whole planet.
Could have been so perfect. Paradise.
And I let it get this far because of the law and the will of the people.
The people? This is all their fault. And they're going to burn for it. Burn!
You're nothing but a mad dog now, aren't you?
Ooh, a threat. But this old dog still has a few teeth.
There are at least 6 different ways I can stop you right now.
But they all involve deadly force, don't they? And you don't do that. No, you need me. You wouldn't be much of a hero without a villain. And you do love being a hero, don't you? The cheering children, the swooning women. You love it so much, it's made you my most reliable accomplice.
Accomplice? What do you...
You could have crushed me any time you wanted. And it wasn't the law or the will of the people that stopped you. It was your ego. Being a hero was too important to you. You're as much responsible for this as I am. So go ahead, fix it somehow, put me on trial, lock me up, but I'll beat it. And then we'll start the whole thing all over again.
I did love being a hero, but if this is where it leads, I'm done with it.
And welcome back. Having talked about all that nightmarish stuff, I thought we might make things a bit lighter for people with our sort of general political leanings, in the sense of just talking a little bit about the unexpected, hoped for, but kind of really materialised silver linings of this situation. Because obviously during the course of the presidential election, there were mixed bags of results. The Democrats lost a bit of ground in the House. I mean, dangerous amounts of ground, really, in the sense that the majority seems to be very feasibly slipping away from them in the next couple of cycles. But they still hold the majority in the House, just about. But what they did manage to pull off just the other day, dramatically, in fact, with the results coming in pretty much as the Capitol Hill incident was happening, was take the Senate, albeit by an absolute millimeter. I mean, the Senate is drawn now. If you count the affiliated Democrats like Sanders, you've got a kind of 50-50 situation, and we've got the incoming first female vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris, who is going to be the tiebreaker in that situation. People have obviously pointed out that this means that for anything to go through the Senate, every single Democrat has to be behind it, and that is going to require some wrangling. That's probably an understatement. But I just wanted to get, 'cause I think I was saying when I was messaging you guys before, like, this is the sort of historical moment where there's so much you could talk about that we're going to neglect things, and it because so much of this has felt really amped up and dangerous, you're actually and it is, you're in danger of neglecting the happy stuff, really, aren't you? Just the stuff that any other election cycle would be the happy stuff that you mark, especially if you're a progressive, you do have a first female vice president here, that happened. That's the thing that happened. How are you guys feeling about that, Meg?
Oh, definitely happy that we have our first female. I mean, to be honest with you, prior to this election, I didn't really know very much about her. I suppose certainly, living away from the States for so long, I kind of, it's hard to keep track of all of the kind of state people that are big in all of the states. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a step in the right direction to have. I would have preferred a female president, but I don't think. I mean, Tierney, you kind of mentioned in the part one of this podcast, like, America's not ready to elect a woman. It's just the chances of a woman getting the first name on the ticket and succeeding, it wasn't going to happen, which is incredibly disheartening. But I'm delighted that we finally have the first female vice president, and it will hopefully, pave the way for more women in that position, and eventually in the presidency.
Yeah, possibly as soon as 4 years from now. We'll see how that goes.
It'd be great, but yeah, I don't know.
I wanted to turn to Tierney, actually, because not just because I know you've got a bit more history with Kamala Harris, haven't you? Not in a personal sense, but in the fact that she, was a California senator.
I saw her at a restaurant once.
Oh, there you go. Because California's really small, isn't it?
It's sort of an inconsequential state.
Yeah, I think that's what I read on Wikipedia.
It's only it's only 1 out of every 8 Americans who live in California.
That's not many. But yeah, I mean, not only do you have that background, obviously, with her being effectively a local state politician, with a pedigree there, but you also you were very sympathetic towards Elizabeth Warren and her presidential campaign, weren't you? As we discussed a bit on the last podcast. Given all that, and your thoughts about Harris herself, I mean, how are you processing this?
I mean, like I said, I liked her. She was sort of my favorite out the gate, but I came around to Elizabeth Warren, and obviously both of them are incredibly accomplished, competent women. I would still prefer Elizabeth Warren to be president right now. That would be great.
And it looks like she's remaining in the Senate, right?
Yeah, I think,
yeah.
And I think that I was actually thinking about that the other day, because you think that with people like Amy Klobuchar throwing her support behind Biden like that, and being in Minnesota, I don't know if Minnesota actually still has a Democratic governor, but there are a couple folks that I thought would have been smart cabinet picks that didn't get tapped, and Elizabeth Warren was one of them, and then maybe Klobuchar was another one that I was kind of like, you'd think that at the very least she would have gotten tapped for something. But yeah, Kamala Harris she was interesting in California because of the part of California where I lived, which is to say that within my circle of friends, people were like, she's a cop, and like that was it. That was their sort of take on it, was that she was not progressive enough, that her history as a DA and the Attorney General was a little bit too much for them to get behind. But ultimately, she stood up for the things that I believe in. It was nice to see her get tapped, especially because she had not been a senator for very long. I think that if they want to consider her to be someone with a lot of longevity, for governor of California at some point, or if she decides to run for president down the line, that she will have sort of built up that resume a little better, because the bar is a lot higher for women in terms of that.
I thought one of the few pieces of media kind of in general around the presidential election campaign itself that I enjoyed the most, God help me, was the vice presidential debate she did with Pence. I thought
Good.
I thought by the debate standards of presidential and vice presidential debates, that was actually not a bad debate. I actually thought, and actually to be fair, I don't like the man, but to be fair to him, I thought Pence did pretty well as well. I thought he was quite, because Pence can often be quite cogent, I think, and quite very, can make his position seem quite reasonable. He's quite good at doing that, I think.
I disagree. I found him to be just like so smarmy, and he just repeated the same talking points so much, and he interrupted her so much, and nothing he said had any substance. And I felt like she just wiped the floor with him, and I don't know if that's just like my bias toward her, or my bias in her favor because of my politics, both my personal politics and sort of my politics in the grander sense. But
I thought it was quite balanced.
It didn't matter because of the fly. Like nothing that anybody said or did mattered.
Oh, I forgot about the fly. Yeah, the fly that got stuck in the telepod with Mike Pence. Yeah, that was those were simpler times, weren't they? Sophie, I mean, what are your thoughts on Harris, and I guess this this moment as well?
Ever the pessimist. She's okay. I don't know. Not a big fan of her history as California Attorney General. But I mean, more recently, she was in favor of Medicare for all. She was one of the lead authors on the legislation for the $2,000 stimulus checks. So if she can continue to actually push Biden to make some progressive changes, then I'm on board. But we'll see. I haven't really heard that much from her recently. Like, where is she?
Well, she's been generally present at these kind of unveilings, hasn't she? Or at least presenting a lot of the kind of new cabinet picks. And they really are. I think most of the most incoming administrations, they really are keen to brand it the Biden-Harris administration, aren't they? That seems to be almost like a core part of the identity of this.
Much more of a team type effort, I suppose.
And there's obviously the situation where Biden, let's face it, is a very old man by political, well, less so by political standards maybe, but by any other job standards, and there's still there's still this debate over whether he's really committed to being a one-term president or whether that's just the way it pragmatically will probably go. But Kamala Harris is being seen as, I think she is, like, with my bookies at least, she is the front runner to be the next Democratic president, or to be the next Democratic nominee at least. So there's a lot riding on her already, really. She'll be the one to beat if Biden decides to go for one term.
I don't know where she even would fit in to like be out in public right now, because Trump is just sucking the oxygen out of the room like usual, especially now. Although again, with him off of Twitter, it's like, I mean, who knows? He may, by losing that bully pulpit, he may have lost everything. But yeah, it is actually kind of funny how she's just been sort of out of the public eye. Hopefully that means that she's just busy.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting with the Trump and his remaining Republican Praetorians, as you say, sucking the oxygen out of the room. It's kind of darkly funny, isn't it, that these like progressive milestones are happening around that, because it couldn't have been more pronounced, could it, when the Capitol was under siege? The Georgia election results were just being finalised, and you were getting this African American senator for Georgia being announced alongside a Jewish senator. At the same time as Confederate flag protesters were running into the Capitol building. It's crazy. I can't remember who said this first, but when events in your life feel like they're from a hack novel because they're too heavy-handed. Real life seems badly written.
Yeah.
It's been a heavy dose of that, but our plan was to pivot to the Republican Party at this point, and not pivot to them in terms of supporting them, but to discuss a bit more about their future directions. But actually, it might be more organic to talk a little bit about the Democrats here, because we're discussing the Senate. in terms, Sophie, you were saying, in terms of your hopes for Harris and stuff like that, and the kind of policy she's historically tended to get behind and stuff, your hopes aren't high for that kind of Biden-Harris leadership. Obviously, they're not the whole part of it. There's the Congress, who haven't got a huge majority, but they have been having more vocally left-leaning members of the Congress. The squad here are the easy ones to highlight, aren't they? Who've had a very busy few years in terms of embedding themselves in the sort of national consciousness. It's probably fair to say that AOC is probably the most famous congressperson, really, isn't she? In terms of a public profile.
Yeah, and I think that's there's definitely some hopeful signs of progress there. In general, I don't feel super hopeful about the party. I think that with the Republicans moving further and further right, what it looks like is that the Democrats are then also moving further and further right in the hopes of, sweeping up those kind of once were Republicans and trying to get them on board because, they're rightly outraged about what the GOP are doing. So, try and get them on board instead of thinking, okay, what about all these people who are on the left, people who don't vote at all? How can we get them on board? I think the entire organization is committed to the status quo and austerity, and I don't see that improving. I'm glad that there are a few, it shows that when there are candidates that run and they're actually running on something that matters and they're making promises to working class people and they're committed to things like Medicare for all and even like we saw in Georgia, one of the big things that the two candidates ran on was $2,000 stimulus checks. Like, you will get $2,000 stimulus checks and people can get on board with that because they need it. So when they actually run on progressive policies, they win. But somehow they're still moving further and further right, and it's just very frustrating to me. So that's what I feel like is going to happen.
Well, in terms of more left-leaning Democratic policies, you'll have the relatively grassroots, members and the Congress people, not describing Congress people as grassroots, but you know what I mean. And you'll have, people like Sanders and Warren remaining in the Senate, and as I say, every vote is going to count in this era, so that also means they're going to be very vocal about a lot of things, I'm sure, and obviously the pandemic's happening, so you've got this crazy situation in some ways similar to that in the UK and Ireland where extraordinary things are happening because they have to, by most political consensus, a lot of right-wing governments are doing things you wouldn't consider right-wing. Left-wing governments are doing things perhaps more authoritarianly than they're comfortable with. All this is happening. Things are blurring a little bit in terms of political axes. Traditionally. Megan, what? I suppose it's sort of two questions, really, isn't it? Like, what would you like the Democratic administration to try and do, and do you think they'll do any of it or be able to?
You mean what would I like them as far as like policies?
Yeah, policies, kind of direction.
Well, the first thing they need to do is like America genuinely needs a national healthcare system. Do you know, like it just, I don't understand how it's 2021 and there's not, the healthcare system is still where it is in America. I think that's kind of the first that to me that needs to be fixed, because so much of people's lives is contingent on their health, and that really needs to be their number one priority, I think. It's very frustrating to see that a bit as Sophie was saying, the further right the Republicans go, the more the Democrats are constantly trying to be the bigger person and hold the middle ground and compromise. And I would like to see them, a bit like Sophie, like I'd like to see them not compromise so much and just maybe be a bit more defiant. I don't know. I'd like them to do. I just feel like they're not doing anything, and I feel like we're in a situation where you have, a few years of a Democrat-controlled government where, if you're lucky, you get a few big things that come through, and then as soon as it goes back to the Republicans, you have years of them just unraveling everything, and then the whole system, I don't even think it's just what the Democrats should be doing. It's the whole system is, you're kind of watching it self-destruct. And I think we're seeing, now it could be decades, but I think the end is coming for the current political structure the way it is. And I honestly don't know what they could do to fix it, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, obviously Obama spent a lot of his political capital, which we now know was his kind of 2-year window to accomplish things, when he had the trifecta. He spent a lot of that on healthcare at a time when, obviously, we were in the middle of the last Great Recession, where healthcare was obviously desperately important, as it always is, but it maybe wasn't in the public consciousness so much that this is what the Democrats should spend their capital on, whereas now we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic and healthcare has never been more prominent. I was talking to a British friend saying, do you remember when no one knew who the health secretary was? Do you remember when that was not even considered a big post?
Yeah.
It wasn't a big job. It's a big job in terms of employers and employment, but, but that's not the case anymore.
No, but it is now. I mean, between healthcare and I suppose debt, especially student debt, like just thinking about my cousins back home, thinking about my whole generation of peers in Indiana that are people that are still in Indiana. We pretty much all grew up with conservative parents, and almost everyone in my age group that I would still be friends with, and certainly a lot of my family members, we're all Bernie supporters, and there's this huge difference between our parents and us and a lot of it is because our generation wants America to have a support structure that doesn't exist, and I think at some point the Democrats are going to have to decide, this is our platform. We are going to be the party that does something about these things. And I just feel like they're not willing to step into that role yet. In numbers, obviously there are a few, people that's their platform, but it's getting quite frustrating sitting around and watching and waiting for them to take on that identity. Just get on with it. Just do it. Just be the progressive party.
I suppose in terms of that wafer thin House majority, particularly, let alone the Senate, I suppose a lot of it comes down to do you just accept that you're going to lose that after 2 years and basically try and do things anyway? And actually maybe with the hope that will help keep the House, things like that. Or do you focus on keeping the suburbs basically, or gaining further suburbs? But
to be honest, what do they have to lose in 2 years? If it go for it, because do it, because if they're always worried about, our political cycle is 2 years now. It's, do you have control? How much could you push through in 2 years? And everyone's terrified of doing the wrong thing that's going to cost them the next 2 years. But they haven't actually, I don't think they've genuinely considered, well, what if we do go off and do these things? Maybe that radical change will get them 2 more years, and then they have 4 years, and then God forbid they have 6 years, and they can start building something. It's just very frustrating to see the back and forth.
Yeah,
I understand that.
Obamacare's proof positive that can work. I mean, it started out underwater, people didn't like it, or they were opposed to it, and then give it a couple of years and people actually, even though it's insurance, they actually have access to health care and they are really appreciative. And that's the kind of thing where I feel like the people who are afraid of universal health care in the United States will find that exactly the same thing happens, is that once you have it, you're just like, why would I go back to the way it was before? I mean, for somebody like Sophie, it must have been like a terrible transition to go from having, granted, my understanding is that, universal health care is not perfect. There are all kinds of problems, but it's still so much better than either not having it or, having, reasonably good care, but having it be incredibly expensive.
I think it tends to be one of the big things along with the Europeans. It's probably alongside gun control, actually, where most Europeans tend to look at America and go, that this is different.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of, even when you're a teenager.
Don't even get me started on guns. Jesus Christ.
Well, they might, well, I don't know if where that's going to focus on the list of priorities. But actually, Tierney, I was going to ask you quickly, because I meant to mention one of the things that gets bandied around as a kind of Democrat hope, and obviously Republican boogeyman a little bit, is the idea of like further statehood expansion, which is kind of a thing that Democrats, depending on their priorities, tend to talk about a little bit when you have like Democrat controlled periods. Puerto Rico gets a lot of attention, obviously. With the events the other day, it's easy to forget that Washington DC also gets talked about as a potential 51st or 52nd state.
Yeah, DC I think has taken, because of the events of Wednesday, is starting to get the attention for becoming its own state, a little bit more, I think, than Puerto Rico right now. I think there was some more thinking about Puerto Rico when they were dealing with the devastating earthquake and hurricanes. But I think they have to get rid of the filibuster in order to do it, and I think they I don't know if they need a 2/3 majority or if they could do it with a simple majority. It's just out of the conversation right now because things are so insane, but I am hoping that it re-enters because, literally the Washington, D.C. license plate says taxation without representation.
Yeah, I can't see it being a 2021 thing they moved much on, but I was reminding myself that Puerto Rico actually had a yes vote, for statehood. Like, that was, 3 months ago, wasn't it? It's pretty recent, and and that's kind of the most decisive it's ever been in a binary referendum as well, where they, I can't remember what the figures was, but 53% for statehood or something like that, and so they've got the mandate now to take to Washington, and it's just what they do with it. It's kind of it's funny how set in stone because of the ages we are, but obviously you'd have to be very, very old now to not think of America as an innately 50-state federation. It's really surreal, isn't it, to think of it as being anything else, which is probably part of the power the Republicans have as a ballast, is that most Americans just think of that as almost like it's kind of like British people with the Queen, they just think of that as like the nature of things,
Yeah, I can't remember when Hawaii became a state or what the reasoning was behind that. I wonder if they just felt bad about Pearl Harbor, or if there was like a specific economic incentive. My guess is probably the latter.
They probably wanted it as a military base.
It was probably because they thought it might go communist.
Yeah.
Given the historical context.
We have Guam and American Samoa and plenty of other colonies.
Now, Tierney, America doesn't have colonies.
I'm choosing my words very specifically.
Read the marketing. That's not something you guys do.
Of course
officially.
Not. What Philippines? So yeah, it's we've got plenty of colonies that have military bases on them. But I feel like, I think it's a worthwhile cause, but I don't know how much wind they're going to have in their sails on that because of just everything else that's going on. Particularly because there's really going to be a lot to deal with the economy. Where I got really exasperated with the Republicans in general is kind of like, this is where I get frustrated with a lot of conservatism. Actually, is like, I'm not I'm conservative in some ways. Obviously, everyone is, but I'm not a conservative. But I get really this sounds weird. I get frustrated with them when they don't believe in themselves. Like when because a lot of the behaviour of the Republican Party in the modern age is that essentially, isn't it? That you can tell they're running scared really behind all the bluster. Demographically, they think they're running scared. They think, most Republican legislators, I think that Washington DC as a state and Puerto Rico as a state would be eternally blue states. They just innately, they'd be like built that way almost, in terms of demographic or political leaning. DC absolutely would be. Puerto Rico, I know a little bit less about the demographics, but I believe they're heavily Catholic, which might affect some things.
Yeah, and as we've seen recently, you're more conservative leaning Hispanic voters. Not everyone, obviously, but those demographics can be unpredictable. But what I keep going back to is like, if you looked at you don't have to go very far back in history to see that there are no innately blue and red states. Was it like Reagan won 49 states in like 84 or something? It's kind of these. This wasn't that long ago. This is a political lifetime, but not more than that. It's kind of, and the Democrats, obviously a very different time then, but like the Democrats turned the map blue in the mid 60s, and kind of, it's not, what are you scared of? If the Republicans grasp, this is me being a bit naive maybe, but if Republicans grasp these statehood opportunities and these enfranchisement opportunities, they're not going to win the state necessarily the first time, but people will remember that. People will respect them for it. People, you expanding the country, that seems like a pretty patriotic thing to do, right?
I don't care about that.
It's actually, and that's actually something that I was thinking about earlier, was that we haven't even gotten to talk about the census and what a clusterfuck that was, and the fact that since so many state governments are still under Republican control, that's where we're really going to run into a lot of trouble, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That's not that rosy, is it? I just wanted to turn, while I've still got you guys, we can get cheerfully apocalyptic again a little bit, at least, or at least we can stop worrying about the current cogent apocalypse and start thinking about a theoretical apocalypse. The Republican Party, nice segue, they exist. They now exist in what's rapidly becoming a post-Trump era, or at least a post-Trump presidency era. Where's that going? I mean, because one of the fun things I've been thinking about for the last few years is, initially when we weren't sure if Trump would get a second term or not, I was thinking, who on earth would they pick to then follow Trump in 2024, if they had to, and I remember joking before Kanye West actually sort of ran for president. That was ridiculous, wasn't it? Thinking that in a sense West was the kind of candidate you'd need for that post-Trump era, because you need to go. It's like the old lady who swallowed a fly. I think I've quoted this before. You need to send bigger and bigger beasts down the well of ridiculousness to keep things going on at that tenor. On a social media scale as well. But Sophie first. The Republican Party at this point seems like it's going insane, right? And by that I don't mean our judgment of its political ideology. They seem like they're ripping each other to shreds. They are falling. They're falling apart.
They're objectively insane. Yeah.
They're falling apart at the moment, even for them.
Yeah.
And that's because the Trump project is imploding. Basically as we speak at the moment. What do you see happening to the Republican Party in the next few years, and can you even begin to imagine what their next presidential candidate looks like?
No, I don't know. I can see it going either completely down the Trump road of just insane QAnon candidates, or I can see them trying to wrangle it together a little bit and going down, a polite Republican route. I think that there'll be nominees from both sides, but I have no idea which one will kind of pick up the support. I love
the idea of a polite Republican as just like low key racist.
Oh yeah,
and low key exploitive.
Yeah, yep. That's Nebraska. It'll be someone I don't know if you're familiar with one of our senators, Ben Sass. He is just the worst, the slimiest. Oh, he's horrible. But anyway, he's always been a never Trumper, except for he votes with Trump 99% of the time. But he's been positioning himself to run in 2024, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's a nominee. But he won't get it because he's such a dweeb. He's just makes my skin crawl. But it'd be somebody like that that'll be that'll put themselves forward, and then somebody who's just conspiracy theory crazy on the other side. So
I would have, if you'd asked me 2 months ago, I would have said Ivanka would be a shoo-in to be not just a candidate, but actually kind of objectively quite a good one, really. Effect. No, I don't. No. I won't get into what I think of her character and things like that, but just in terms of presentation, and in terms of being a coherent, attractive, more reasonable seeming than him type figure, and someone who could maybe bring back some of the more liberal kind of inclinations. But then it's the surname, isn't it? You've just, the way things are going at the moment, that he's just completely tanking his own brand above everything else, which is an ironic fate for someone like him. Megan, in terms of your own kind of expectations, but also maybe in terms of what Republicans in the States or Republican leaning people want in a sense from the Republican Party after Trump. What do you think? Where do you think it's going?
Well, I'm extraordinarily pessimistic for the future of the Republican Party. I think especially as far as presidential candidates go, I think Trump is the beginning of a massive downhill slide. I think we're going to see ever increasing extremism, and I think that a bit like you remember in 2016 when we all were like, oh, do you remember George W? And like how, you know, innocent he, like, we'd love to go back to him. I think in a few, you know, Trump is the beginning of a very bad cycle for the Republicans. But there's a lot of people back home that are Republican, either in my family or, you know, friends, members of my community that are definitely being underrepresented. My dad passed away in February of 2020, so he obviously missed the election, and he was a lifelong Republican. And I remember having a conversation with him in October before he died, and he didn't know what to do. He felt like he had no representation anymore in politics because, you know, he was a politically conservative person, but he was also a moral person who had, you know, value. And it just, there's become this vacuum in the Republican Party for anyone who is moderate, and there's definitely an awful lot of people back in Indiana, I would say, who feel that they have been abandoned politically. There is not a representation for them anymore because they are decent people who don't necessarily support Trump. They did the first time because he was the Republican candidate and they always vote Republican, but a lot of those people that I know of who did vote for him in 2016 did not vote at all this year, because a few people I know voted Libertarian. It'd be interesting to see if the Libertarian Party could somehow, you know, evolve in a meaningful way.
It's so interesting you mentioned the Libertarians, because the other day when I was watching the Capitol attack stuff, but also just thinking about the future direction of the Republican Party, I was like, in some ways this would be a great moment for the Libertarian Party to put their hands out and, you know, make a lot of noise and go, come to us, disaffected Republicans, you know, come to us. We're not part of the swamp, you know, we're outside, we're genuine outsiders. But then I was thinking, if you were the Libertarian leadership, who presumably have their own establishment and their own kind of long-seated thing, would you want to risk that? Because it's essentially like you've just seen someone barely dismount from a tiger they've been riding for 4 years, and you're trying to jump on next. You know, it's kind of like,
yeah. I mean, I think part of the problem is, at the end of the day, the political system in America is so dysfunctional that you don't get the type of people who go for especially the you know, the kind of the big positions of power, especially on the Republican side. Like, they're not really the type of people that you necessarily want to be in power. You know, certainly back home, most people, they really focus on their local government, the state government, and they really seem to rely on those levels of power because those seem to impact their life, their everyday life, a lot more. And there is a lot of just having not a lot of interest in what's happening in DC anymore, because, you know, you can only look at it fall apart for so long. Do you know? Yeah,
that's probably a big mood, as they say, amongst a lot of people. I mean, Tierney, like, do you I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, like, at the moment, the question is, like, is there a Republican Party that the Democrats can work with? Is actually remains quite an important question, or has it become more important, you know, with the Senate balance and everything? I mean, like, I think Sophie mentioned, like, you know, the sort of, in 2010 it was the Tea Party branch essentially that took back the Congress, you know, and they became the Tea Party Republicans to an extent, and they still are part of its DNA, and that's gone on, that's developed and evolved through Trumpism. We could in 2022 be looking at the QAnon Republicans who take back the Congress in quite a aggressive way, and obviously some of those will be the rising stars of the party. You know, they're not. It's not even ridiculous. They might be presidential candidates. You know.
Yeah, I mean, and that's pretty typical for the pendulum to swing the other direction. I think that the only thing that might change that is if the response to, like I said, the economic fallout from COVID and, of course, the health consequences. You know, any positive changes for our healthcare system may change that. If people are doing better in 2 years, then they may feel differently. That would be my hope. But that's traditionally not what happens. To to build, though, on what Meg was saying, on the New York Times podcast, The Argument, the other day, the left host of that show, I'm blanking on her name, was saying that one of the things that had changed for her in 2020 in terms of her opinions was she was like, I don't really know if we should have a centralized republic. Maybe states should be more individual. And I thought about, or basically she said, I don't think the union can survive. I think we're probably looking at, 50 states that we best if they split off. And there was a time when we would, sort of joke about California secession, like, LOL, it'll never happen. Oh my God, why are we even like talking about this? But then the more I think about it, I'm like, maybe that's a really good idea. Maybe that is the direction that things could go, because I agree that the current system is so dysfunctional and it's so clearly falling apart. But I think that unfortunately it takes outsider perspectives to really assess that.
Well, I mean, I think some of what you're seeing is a gradual process of obviously loads of people understand this process better than me, but like the Republican Party, the traditional white evangelist Christian right in the States is shrinking. It just is. It's not like America's becoming a-religious or anything like that. Obviously there's this massive influx still happening and change happening, but they need something else to rely on. And they're finding it, obviously.
Less religious. There is an increasingly secularizing public, which is kind of interesting, but that's what's such a big problem with the more conspiratorial right, is that you don't have to be. I mean, basically, I think somebody pointed out to me as being like satanic panic redux. Basically, that it's exactly the same as the people in the 90s who were blaming like childcare centers and so forth as being like these satanic pedophile cults. Same thing all over again. I think what's been really interesting to me, though, is seeing who the boogeyman is for the Republicans. Antifa being the big one, and I'm just like, which is kind of hilarious to me. I think I saw somebody tweeted the other day that they're like, the reason that these are like not anarchists at these protests is there's no food not bombs table, and no like white guy in dreadlocks like patiently explaining the ideology to you.
I think one thing that's happened in the last, probably most, like gradually over 2020 and maybe a bit before that, is it's probably happening in some ways since 2017 at least, is that most Republicans are now convinced that the Democratic machine, as you might say, runs all the way from Biden all the way down to Antifa continuously. That they are part of the same serpent, shall we say. And obviously we think that's not true, but I'd imagine we think that's not true. But a lot of Democrats think that the machine runs, the Republican serpent runs all the way down from Trump or Pence, all the way down to the Proud Boys, and to some of the people we saw at the Capitol attack the other day. I think there's the idea of extremism not being representative of the other side has disappeared largely. And I think that's bipartisanly happened in a way. And obviously left-leaning people tend to think it's justified when they look at the Republican Party, and Republicans think exactly the same about the left. They think it's all crooked and corrupt, and that Biden, although he's the respectable, cuddly old man, genial face of that, he is the weight of the authoritarian left is behind him, and and we think exactly the same about them. So that's not great, is it?
I don't think the two sides are equivalent in this particular circumstance, because like I said, like anyone who's Antifa has no real love for the Democratic Party, and then, but however, not all.
But presumably the MAGA types have no real love for the Republican Party.
I mean, they're basically taking it over, it seems. But I would say that not all Republicans are Proud Boys, but all Proud Boys are Republican, I think is probably the way I put it. Where like, yeah.
Well, they'd probably say not all Antifa, are Democrats, but they'll vote Democrat when the time comes, or they'll facilitate the Democrat vote steal, or there'll be various flavors of it, but
Yeah, I guess the socialists, or I guess the people you would call like actual radical left. The fact that Trump referred to Twitter as the radical left was like the funniest thing I'd ever heard in my life. But yeah, the actual leftists that I know did either didn't vote for president at all because they're in California. It doesn't matter. They were more focused on like local issues, and they're spending more time like agitating for rent control and things like that. And they kind of, they're Bernie or bust as far as federal policies go. They love AOC, which is great. But yeah, that's sort of why I get pushed back against that like equivalency, is because it's like, no, like, Sophie's a good example. It's just like, no, she doesn't love Joe Biden.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that in 2016, the third and fourth party vote in the States was getting bigger, and that had been a trend upwards for both the Libertarian Party and the Green Party for a few cycles, and it peaked in 2016, or at least has for now. And what you've had in 2020 seems to have been something a little bit akin to what we had in Britain in 2017, where for various reasons, well, not time to get into that, the two big traditional parties coalesced, a lot of huge votes around them again for various reasons. So you got, because we didn't really mention before, like, Biden's won a huge electoral mandate here, like literally record-breaking electoral mandate. It was like something approaching 82 million votes, something like that in the end. But Trump won a huge amount of votes. Trump won more votes than he did in 2016 by a long way. You're sound like you're him, don't you, when you say things like this? By a tremendous amount. Was it something bordering on like 74 million? I forget the exact figure, but it was a big vote total for Republicans, like in recent history, and it's these. We're talking about Trumpism as this defeated, mangled thing, but it clearly did it for a lot of people, and did it not, and that wasn't just the Proud Boys, that is a lot of people were convinced, not necessarily, obviously it's always the case, isn't it, not necessarily convinced by him, but convinced that he was better than Biden and his side,
or at least convinced that they don't want a Democrat. I think in 2016 people were maybe willing to go for the smaller party because they felt like they were voting their conscience, whereas I suppose maybe this time around it was a bit more of a, if I'm going to vote, I want to make sure that it's going to go for somebody, and if you didn't want to go for the Democrats, then Trump was really your only choice, which is hard.
And and you might not be rich now, but maybe one day you will be, and then you'll get those tax breaks, right?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what the percent, because like I was saying earlier, like a lot of my friends and family back home just didn't vote this time round because they consider themselves to be Republicans and they didn't like Trump, so they abstained. I'd be interested to see the percentages difference between people who consider themselves Republican who didn't vote at all versus people who consider themselves to be Democrat who didn't vote at all because they didn't like Biden. I'd be very interested if, I don't know how they'd find that out, but it'd be quite interesting to see what proportion of the population basically said, I don't like either of them, so I'm not going to do anything, because I'd say,
or like the number of people that voted for Biden because they definitely didn't want Trump.
Oh, that was me.
Not because they like Biden, compared to the number of people who voted for Trump because they definitely didn't want Biden. That was me too.
Yeah, just out of interest, Sophie, did you like any of the Democratic nominees? Was there?
I would have. I voted for Bernie in the primary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have been okay with Warren as well.
And I know, Tierney, you kind of preferred Warren, you said at one point,
Yeah, for once, California put their primary early enough where it meant something, which is kind of nice. We weren't just a rubber stamp in June. And I voted for her. I strayed toward Buttigieg for a minute because I found him to be really intelligent, and I like the idea of having sort of a newer generation. I'm also a big proponent of identity, so having a gay man in a prominent position was important, but when it came right down to it, I was like, he's just too moderate. Like, that's not what I'm about. And so there were a number of reasons I preferred Elizabeth Warren, but in the end, it was like, did I vote for Joe Biden? Yeah, but it's just because, I was voting against Trump. I do have an honest belief that I do think that 78 is a little bit too old. I do, and I hate to be ageist, but your mental faculties are different at that age. They are. And
Well, if Biden does become a one-term president, voluntarily or otherwise, you might end up with something we've not seen in quite a long time, which would be both competitive and crowded Democrat and Republican field in the same year.
Oh, like it was in 2008.
I suppose so. That's probably the nearest equivalent. Yeah, because although it was competitive this year on the, competitive and crowded on the Democratic side, that wasn't really, it wasn't as crowded in 2016. Even though it was quite vicious.
I do wonder if they wouldn't sort of treat it as, Kamala Harris is the heir apparent, so we're just gonna, push her through, or if Biden were to resign before the end of the term, and therefore she would just be sort of a shoo-in. It's hard to say.
I remain. Maybe you guys can clarify this for me. I remain confused on whether AOC can legally run for president next time.
How old is she?
Because, well, isn't she right? So I've looked this up, right, and I still don't understand it. So you have to be 35 to run for president. I think she turns 35 before she would be sworn in, but after she would have to be declared as a candidate and run in the primaries, etc. Sorry, yeah, that's right. So she would turn 35 while she was campaigning to be president.
I think you just need to be 30. Yeah, I think you just need to be 35 when you're sworn in. I don't think it matters when you're campaigning.
Okay, well, I mean that's a realistic
she'll
prospect.
Run, personally.
Not in 2024. Definitely not.
Yeah, I'd rather see her unseat Chuck Schumer personally, or Kirsten Gillibrand.
Yeah, plenty of Democratic infighting to look forward to, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess as I'm getting to be more familiar with New York politics, that where I'm just like, oh, I don't like any of these people. like the Cuomo worship was just bizarre. He sucks. He's the worst.
Well, it's nice to know you're settling into the local scene enough to start to really dislike people.
I don't think I'd be a proper New York lefty if I wasn't like, fuck Cuomo. So
it's a sort of shibboleth.
Still technically resident of California, IRS, just so you know.
Can I just ask Sophie another question, actually? Because you were kind of saying that you weren't very happy so far with a lot of the cabinet appointments. Is there anyone in particular that you, because like I said earlier, I really don't know the majority of them, and I do have to cackle when I look at a lot of the appointments, because it seems like everyone that was the majority of the positions are just people that have been moved up from they were all juniors in the Biden administration, and now they've just been moved up a bit. And then there's a few interesting people that seem to be coming from the public sector, from nonprofits, which I personally think is a good thing to have political people being moved in. But if you could just expand a bit.
Yeah, I think most of the ones that I've seen, at least the key positions, are either were in Obama's cabinet or advisors. There's a lot of people from big business and finance, people from Airbnb, Amazon, Uber, Lyft. Do you know who Neera Tanden is?
No.
Well, she's pretty terrible.
Enlighten me.
One of the things that she's a big austerity person. She backs cuts to Social Security, as does Biden, cuts to Medicare, Medicaid. She also argued that Libya should give the US money from their oil revenues to pay for the times that we bombed them.
Excellent.
So she's
Great luck.
So she's in there. That's nice.
Where has she been put?
She is. I actually have a list of the cabinet. She's in the Office of Management and Budget.
Okay.
Well, I hope that Libyan request works out for her then, in terms of balancing the books.
Yeah, it's just a lot of people who support cuts to services.
Okay.
The guy, Anthony Blinken, he's Secretary of State. He was one of the big supporters of the intervention in Libya. Loves to give a lot of military money to Israel.
Okay.
The Director for National Intelligence, Avril Haines. She had a key role in Obama's decision to everything with the drone strike programs.
Okay.
So just a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of like fracking people.
So there's kind of a bit of, it kind of looks like there's, I suppose, a lot of lip service to kind of diversity and
Yes.
gender equality, but when you actually kind of dig into the track records of a lot of the people, they're still pretty.
That's what it looks like to me.
Okay, yeah, no,
and I haven't researched every single
No.
person, so I don't know if
Yeah.
maybe there are some good people in there. I don't really know.
Yeah.
Deb Haaland, as Secretary of Interior.
Oh yeah, mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's super interesting. I'm excited to see what she does.
Is she the first? Is she the lady that's going to be the first Native American? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Secretary of the Interior,
Yeah.
I think. I actually couldn't find out that much information on her and how her views and her policies. But yeah, she's an interesting pick.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see who makes the most impact in these first 2 years. I'll have to reconvene you guys as a kind of assessor of the Biden presidency. Should we say about 6 months in or something like that? When we've actually seen something. As you've said though, I think as we've all touched on, like it's going to be pandemic cleanup for a while, isn't it? Like,
well, you can always do first 100 days. It's always a big. It's always a big one for new presidency. It's what they're going to do in their first 100 days.
Well, that will surely just be pandemic, right? Because if it's anything else, I mean, pretty much anyone could look at that and say that's irresponsible, you know.
Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, there's been. It sounds like there's enough support for the $2,000 total, I guess, stimulus, so that if they can get that through, that would be great. And it'd be great to see how many people have been vaccinated now that they're talking about just opening the floodgates and getting as many needles and arms as possible. That didn't come out the way I wanted it to.
You heard it here first. This is the radical left reporting live from the Get Needles in Everyone's Arms party, and send everyone free money, obviously, which is another cliche. Well, I think we'll wrap there, guys, because we've slightly overrun, but I think profitably so. Thanks so much for joining me. That was really appreciate it from all of you, and I think we got a good range of perspectives out of that on this crazy
left
time.
and lefter.
Yeah, feel free to assign those amongst yourselves. I'd like to thank you all for joining me, and I'd love to hear from you all again soon on this, and hopefully on some more cheery things as well. Maybe next time we can just talk about Wonder Woman or something. Something a bit more lighthearted.
Oh, I'll have some opinions on that.
Yeah, so
I'll find some.
yeah, good.
I haven't seen it yet.
I'm sure. I think it remains the fact that. Does it remain the fact that none of you have seen it?
I haven't, but I do have some opinions on Gal Gadot's politics.
Me too.
Definitely one for another episode. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining me, and thanks everyone who listened to this. We'll see you all again soon.
Cool.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications, or get me personally on @deep_Fagiani. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.